Hey everybody, in today's video we're going to be on a crash course in Dxtory. This video will hopefully cover pretty much everything you could possibly know or need to know about the software. Now there's a couple things I won't cover, such as the RawCap system and some of the streaming systems, but I'll be covering that in a later video. But here is just pretty much what you need to know to get really comfortable with the software and to get started with it. So how about we get started? First of all, we have the target panel. This shows what application or 3D program is being hooked by Dxtory. A hook is when Dxtory is integrating itself between the GPU and the output. It effectively is grabbing frames in the buffer through the driver. This allows for very high efficiency. This is how these programs like Dxtory, Fraps, and PlayClaw are able to perform much better than programs like Camtasia or Cam Studio. Those grab the top final image and have to bring it basically back down into a format they can encode and store. Now, on to profiles. When a new application or 3D program is detected, Dxtory will either load up a pre-made profile you've made before, or create a new one based upon default. Default, in a better sense, is a template for new profiles to be based upon, and also a master template if you happen to use the Use Default Setting option. And here's a small note with profiles. If Dxtory happens to detect a game or a program you don't want, simply head into the profile editor, select the program, and hit Ignore. It will be added to the Ignore list. If you accidentally added something to the list, just close the editor, click on the Ignore List button, find your program, and delete it from the list. It will now be detected like normal. Set up your default profile beforehand, so anytime a new program is loaded, it will be using the common setting you developed. Setting Use Default Setting will sync all profiles back to the default setting. This allows you to control all profiles set with that through the default, and confusingly, from any other profile with that option turned on. So for instance, if I had Battlefield 3 and Minecraft turned on with Use Default Setting, I could change Battlefield 3's options through the Minecraft profile. Keep that in mind, as it can be confusing when settings change without your knowledge. Now on to overlays. With Fraps, you really only have the option of an FPS counter in one of 5 states. With Dxtory, you can place it in one of 9 positions, including off. Along with that, you can have it show video FPS, which is the rendering FPS of the engine, write file FPS, which is the amount of frames per second Dxtory is able to write, and the record status, which will show recording or possibly some other errors which might come up, though that is very rare. Along with that, you can change the color of these statuses to any other color you might imagine, including opacity, if you want a more subtle look. Besides that, you have the option of coloring capture frames. These allow you to see directly what you're actually recording. Same goes for screenshot frames. Both of these colors are editable, just like the status colors, along with opacity. Now with Dxtory's profile system, you can develop and set up folders for any game or game engine you could possibly need. I recommend firstly making all the folders and then setting them up with the default profile. Then, set up a default folder for all those times you don't have the time to set up folders. It will create a profile using all these options and will dump the video in default. Later, you can just check off the box of the folder you want to capture to. Now, screenshots are a single folder in this case, but you can set up a folder for each profile you like. This is great for those times when you're taking a lot of screenshots with Dxtory's auto screenshot and high-speed screenshot options. More on that later. Now, onto hotkeys. With Dxtory, you have more options than simply taking video or taking screenshots. You have hotkeys for push-to-talk, single screenshots, high-speed screenshots, auto screenshots, and overlay positions for one of the 9 states. You also have the options of showing the movie frame, like mentioned before, and showing the screenshot frame, like mentioned before. I prefer to leave the default setting option checked, as I never really need to change these. However, you might play a game such as a simulator with dozens and dozens of key bindings, and there may be a conflict, and you may want to change it. So go ahead, turn off the Use Default Setting box, and set it up to your liking, so you don't have to affect other profiles. Now, onto the infamous Video tab, but it's not really confusing. Let's just split up some of the sections. You have the codec, you have cropping, scaling, frame rate, output options, and some advanced options here. First, codecs. The included Dxtory codec honestly is not very useful for most people. It's slow, not very good at compressing, and in general, most people have problems with it. I'd recommend you install the Lagarith or UT Video Codec Pack. Lagarith is a single codec with various color space modes for various compression levels. UT is actually a single codec, but it has 4 profiles where you can use RGB, RGB with alpha, YUV422, and YUV420. RGB is your standard full-resolution 24-bit codec. Each color has 8-bit range. RGBA is for alpha uses, good for exporting from a 3D program or maybe After Effects. This is a 32-bit codec with an extra 8-bit alpha channel. YUV422 is sort of like RGB, except that instead of 3 color channels, you have a luma channel, which is brightness, and then you have 2 chroma channels, which hold the color. Both of these channels are processed with something called chroma subsampling. This is where their resolution is reduced. This may sound bad, but it's actually perfectly usable and very common. In fact, most cameras are using YUV420, which is technically worse than 422. Basically, 422 is where the color channels are reduced in horizontal resolution by half. So in that case, a 1080p video has a color resolution of 960 by 1080, instead of the full 1928 by 1080, which you'd get from an RGB or YUV444, which both have full resolution in all channels. YUV420 is similar to 422, except that it's also reduced vertically by half. So it's actually 960 by 540 for the color. This may seem really low, but in all respects, it's actually very unnoticeable because the luma channel keeps most of the sharpness and information intact. Think of it like a pencil drawing, and then watercolors are on top. The pencil is full resolution, and the watercolor is then lower in resolution. In any case, if you're going to encode to any format besides some sort of lossless or uncompressed codec, it will be turned into a 420. YouTube uses an H.264 codec, which will turn it to 420, regardless of what you want. I can't believe I forgot to mention this, but as I've been editing through, I realized my mistake. I didn't mention what all this actually means for use. RGB, like I said, is your primary, it's your full resolution codec. But what do the other, like 422 and 410 and 411, what do they actually mean for real-time use? Well, RGB, consider it 100% bandwidth, sort of. But YUV422, because the color channels, 2 out of the 3 channels have half the resolution, you end up using 33% less bandwidth, or over your recorded file size, it's going to be 33% roughly smaller file size. YUV420 is going to be half the file because you have basically 2/3 of the information is then cut in a quarter. So it roughly ends up being about half the bandwidth needed and half the file size. I will return you to your regularly scheduled programming. Now, on to cropping. Dxtory has 2 methods of cropping: an absolute mode, where you choose the resolution, and a relative mode, where you choose the amount of pixels to remove. The align and clip size options are your absolute modes. These are very similar to Photoshop's canvas options. Alignment is where cropped area will be based from. If you wanted to record a cropped version of a game to a specific resolution, you could set both of these drop-down menus to center, and then type in the options in the box. For margin, this is where you can cut off part of the image by a certain value, if you desire to, sort of like a trim. Now, on to scaling. The great thing about Dxtory versus Fraps is that instead of just full size or half size, is that you can choose whatever output resolution you want. Generally, I leave mine at 1080p, as exporting anything over in most cases is wasted. And if I did need to do that, I could set it up for that specifically. With this mode, it will scale down, but also up to 1080p. Percentage is a quick and easy method of cutting down some video. And if you're good with percentages, it can be fast. For instance, a 2560 by 1600 frame scaled by 75% will be 1920 by 1200, and 50% will be 1280 by 800. Now, on to frame rates. With this, you can easily type in whatever you'd like, but keep in mind, YouTube is only up to 30 FPS. However, such as with my Motions of War video shot at 60 FPS, it can be good for slow motion. I'm surprised Dxtory doesn't have an option for 24 or 25 FPS, but those can be easily typed in with no issue. At this point, I'd like to move into the advanced options here. Synchronized video FPS specifically. This is pretty much identical to Fraps' lock FPS mode. where it will capture up to your set frame rate, and it will let the game render up to that point. But it's not merely a cap, as Dxtory has that option too. But the idea is to synchronize the render and recording frame rates. This creates a smoother video. Frames rendered at odd intervals will look skippy if played back at consistent intervals later. This is known as microstutter, and is a major issue with multi-GPU systems. The GPUs render frames fast, sure, but if the times when they render and push to screen are inconsistent, the motion will seem jerky. This is where synchronized video FPS comes in. It helps to force the game engine to render at a consistent interval between frames, creating smoother video. The only problem is that it does indeed cap the frame rate, similar to VSync. Fraps has the option of unlocked FPS, and while this is different than simply turning off the sync FPS option in Dxtory, it has the option of letting the game render at multiples of the capture FPS. For instance, letting a game render at 120 FPS, Fraps will record every fourth frame for a very consistent 30 FPS output. Fraps has no completely unlocked mode, which is why it will sometimes drop and lock to the recording FPS if you ever are in a very intensive moment. With the option unchecked, Dxtory will let the game engine render as fast as possible, unless you have a cap on, and it will record the frames that lie in the window for capture. What this means is that for 30 FPS, you have a 33.333 millisecond window where a frame could be captured. In the game engine, you could have plenty of frames whizzing by past that point, but Dxtory tries to grab the most accurate one in that time frame. With lower FPSs, Dxtory has less to work with, and in those cases, the video will feel less smooth. This is the main reason Dxtory supposedly feels faster, when in reality it just doesn't strangle the engine to do what it wants to do. But Fraps will provide smoother video, but unfortunately, it does strangle the engine regardless. Now, include mouse cursor. Some games will use a software or hardware cursor. Since hardware cursors are actually rendered by the GPU and are in the buffer, Dxtory is able to grab them. However, some games use software cursors, which are generally rendered by the CPU and won't show up normally. If you find that you have no cursor in the game, try turning on this option. Finally, on this page, we have output options. File output simply means it's going to write to a file. This may seem kind of obvious and silly, but wait, Dxtory has the option of direct show output. What this means is that Dxtory can pipe the recorded video through a virtual webcam to be picked up by other programs, like streaming software, such as Livestream, Stickam, or even XSplit. This is much faster than using a screen capture software to grab the visuals. Dxtory has the ability to make 4 webcam streams virtually, but we'll look at that in a later video. The format is referencing the file format, the container. RawCap is an interesting beast. This allows you to place recording locations on multiple hard drives, and Dxtory will do a sort of behind-the-scenes soft RAID, where it will record to multiple hard drives at once. This can be a pain to combine them back together, but useful if you have many oddly sized hard drives and want high-speed capture. However, any modern 500GB or larger desktop drive should be able to manage about 70 megabytes per second sustained. That should be plenty for even 1080p 30 FPS capture, but we can take a look at that in a future video. That's all for the video tab. Let's move on. Now, the audio tab. Fraps has the option of recording multiple inputs, but only system audio and an audio input device of your choosing. This is simple and easy to understand. Unfortunately, easy usually means lack of control. Dxtory is tricky, but once you set it up, it's simple to maintain. In Dxtory, we can include practically unlimited audio devices, and not just input devices, but also output devices. With Dxtory right now, I simply have my onboard audio under the first device, and my second device is my AT2020 microphone. I can also control the volume directly here. Each device also has the option for push to talk, although they all use the same hotkey, so keep that in mind. Each device can also have its own stream for very powerful editing potential, and also can use its own codec and quality options. I'd recommend simply sticking to PCM and the native format of the device. The separate editing streams allow you to even do noise cancellation and audio editing on your voice separate from the game. This is what I normally do to take out background noise, enhance my voice, do level adjustments, and take out any sneezes or coughs I might do during a live recording. Unfortunately, you don't have the option to bake the streams together if you desire, although Sony Vegas works directly with these files. Now, onto the Screenshot tab. Screenshots are very similar to video in this case. For the high-speed capture, It will grab frames as fast as it can as screenshots and dump them to disk. I tested it to be, for me, around 23 frames per second. It will run for as long as the key is pressed. You can set a limit right here for a sort of burst mode if you're looking for screenshots of a fast moment or animation. Auto repeat is nearly just like Fraps' option, except that you can interval for milliseconds. The default is 1 second, or 1000 milliseconds. File format is similar to Fraps', with TGA, BMP, PNG, and JPEG, although in Dxtory, you can set the compression level of the JPEG. With Fraps, I believe it's stuck at 90%, which usually is very noticeable in most cases. Clipping is the same exact deal with movies. Same with mouse cursor and scaling. Now, onto the Advanced tab. These options are usually rather badly understood, and as the developer is from Japan, the translations are somewhat crude and hard to understand. But I will explain what I can, but keep in mind most of these are for diagnostics, so you probably won't need to mess with them. First, Start Movie Capture When Detected means that when Dxtory detects and hooks into a program, it will record immediately. This might be useful if you want to grab an intro film or something before you manage to hit record. Disable Native Memory Write. He mentioned that it disables low-level API memory writes. My guess is that some hardware doesn't like the software accessing low-level sections and can cause issues. He simply mentions disable if there's a problem, so I'm not sure. Check Destruction of Device. Again, I'm not really sure. I believe this option basically does a check for when it loses a hook on a program. That's my theory, but I haven't had a need to try it. Permanent Hook. From his explanation, here's my best guess. When Dxtory hooks into a game and is closed without the game being closed beforehand, sometimes the game will crash. The permanent hook might allow the hook to stay engaged without Dxtory being open, but again, I haven't had to use it, as I haven't had a game crash on me. Delay Hook. This is useful if you have many programs that hook into the game, like MSI Afterburner or EVGA Precision. The delay will actually delay Dxtory's detection so as not to disrupt the other programs. Multi-GPU Fixed Code. Again, this one really isn't explained. However, when I was recording Skyrim months and months ago, I could not record over 10 FPS without this turned on. So if you're on a computer with multiple GPUs and you find that your FPS is tanking, give it a shot. It might just be the special sauce for you. Force CPU Processing. Again, a badly explained option here. It says it offloads GPU processing to the CPU. This might be things for like image scaling and some buffers, but I probably wouldn't bother with it unless you just want to test it out. Enable Synchronous Surface Lock. This is another odd one. On the Dxtory website, it mentions something about giving priority to file FPS. However, combined with the pop-up help on the current program, it seems that it does more of an instantaneous write to the destination drive, possibly to remove some sudden drops in FPS as information backs up in some buffers. Wait for available buffer. Again, it's unexplained and I can't find an answer. Sorry. Processing threads. These are the threads for Dxtory to use, not the codec necessarily. Usually the codec has its own built-in multi-threading options. I really have no recommendation specifically, but I went ahead and set them all to 8 logical processors for myself. Limit Video FPS. This is useful if you're in a game where your system is able to render out many hundreds of FPS, such as the original Half-Life or Halo. There is little point to letting your system pump out 600 FPS unless you're in a cold area and need a space heater. Also, some games don't work very well with varying FPS numbers, such as Halo 2 Vista. Limit it to 60 FPS, and you will be able to have a much more smooth and predictable experience. Now, onto the Global tab. Disable Print Screen Snapshot. This is so you can stop print screen from taking a snapshot of your desktop and placing it in the clipboard, if you happen to need to do that. Check Update is for Dxtory to check for new updates periodically, usually during the initial system boot up. Updates come out usually every 3 to 4 weeks on average. Profile Icon Size. Simple. Look up top. That's it. Show Task Tray Icon. This is the icon of your main Windows bar. I prefer to keep it. Hide Taskbar button when minimized. This is so that you only have the task tray icon open instead of the taskbar view. I keep this option unchecked, as I like to see it up there. Shared Java Profile. No idea. And here is the Information tab. Here, you will see sort of an About page. But more importantly, if you need help, this is probably where you'll go to get the information that the developer is asking for. He'll ask for the environmental information text, and possibly the other 2 logs. The environmental information text will give loads of information about the codecs, your profile information, Dxtory options, and most of the codecs installed on your system. That's all for Dxtory right now. I will make future videos looking in more detail about the software, audio editing, testing performance, video quality, web streaming, and raw cap recording. But for now, I think this is enough. Just one last note. When you find a video that says, best settings for Dxtory, or Fraps, or something, disregard it. The best settings are the ones that you choose after you understand your tools, your software, and your hardware. Best is pretty much always subjective. And in my experience for software, it couldn't be more true. Experiment with it, and if you still have issues, post here or on the user forum on Dxtory.com. I hope this cleared up a bunch of mystery about the software. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe if you found it useful. Rate the video in whichever way you like, and I will talk to you later. Bye.